to our judges, Kevin Miller from Miller Thompson, Jason Clares from Camilla Thuringer, Lee Brand from Willows Willis, L.P. Lawson. Thank you to Speaker of the House, Brad Willick. The format will be as follows. Prime Minister will have 5 minutes, 4 constructive speeches, 7 minutes each. Leader of the Opposition will have 5 minutes speech plus 2-minute rebuttal. Prime Minister, 2-minute rebuttal. I will show time card at various intervals to indicate the remaining time at each minute, at the final 30 seconds, and at the final 10 seconds. Your time is up when the red card is shown. I will stop any speaker who exceeds the maximum time limit. A knock on a table like this will indicate the end or beginning of protected time. No questions, comments, cell phones, or picture taking will be permitted from the audience. Heckling is not allowed in the competition. This includes participants and audience members. Teams who heckle will be penalized at the speaker's discretion. The audience will only be permitted to applaud at the end of the debate. Immediately following the presentation, viewers and delegates must leave the presentation room for judges' discussion. At this time, I'll hand this over to the Speaker of the House to open the floor.
I now call this House to order. Welcome to the quarterfinals of the 2014 JDC West debate competition. The resolution today before the House is be it resolved that Canada eliminate the food industry supply chain management system. Now I understand there's a coin toss, so inside government we have Team E. Okay, fantastic. And that would leave side opposition being Team F. No. I remind the gallery and members that there is absolutely no heckling or applause during the round. The gallery may applaud the members after the debate has finished. I now call upon the Prime Minister, who shall speak for a total of 5 minutes, the first and last of which will be protected time.
Mr. Speaker, in Canada today, we think that producers, retailers, and consumers must work together to create an optimal situation for them to purchase food, produce food, and consume food. We think that the food supply management system in Canada today is harmful to producers in the long run. It is harmful to consumers who don't have the ability to buy what they want to buy. It is harmful to retailers who are forced to supply themselves from retailers who are only able to produce large enough from one single farm because of subsidies that are in place. Our plan for you today is going to have 3 aspects. 1, we want to phase out over 10 years all subsidies and import quotas that limit the amount, limit the types of things that are produced in the food supply industry. So for example, in Quebec, there are dairy quotas. We would like to get rid of those. We would also like to get rid of dairy subsidies, for example. We think furthermore, the second part of that is that any overseeing bodies that handle the supply and selling of food, such as the Canadian Wheat Board, which has already been dismantled, are also going to be dismantled within 10 years. They must present this plan to all the stakeholders that they represent, and that plan must be phased out within 10 years. We recognize that there might be a harm in doing so, but we believe that a 10-year period is appropriate for learning how to compete in a new market. So for that reason, we also have a third aspect of our plan, in which farmers or other business people who face bankruptcy after 5 years without any hope of retraining will now be able to access job retraining from the government, as well as some small amount of compensation for the losses they have suffered because of the removal of these subsidies or import quotas that they have benefited from in the past. We have 4 arguments for today. I'm going to get into the first one. Here's what they are. The first one is about how these businesses have a lack of choice in entering the market. The second argument is going to talk about a lack of competitive advantage, which my second speaker will get into. He will also touch on our third argument, which is why there is a lack of consumer choice in the market. And my last speaker will touch on the idea that there is a lack of international leadership shown by countries that have these subsidies or protectionist measures in place. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is the lack of choice for consumers. I think in the status quo today, these types of protectionist measures are meant to put in place for politicians to earn bonus points in the short run, right? They're meant to protect domestic industries, which in and of themselves won't be able to compete in an international market. I think the trends that we've been seeing through increasing regional free trade agreements, through increasing multinational free trade agreements, is that these types of protectionist measures are not beneficial to small businesses. They're not beneficial in several ways. One, I don't think small businesses who have subsidies for the types of things they are producing face the same pressure to innovate. They don't face the same pressure to actually engage with the market they should be a part of. And for that reason, the government is artificially propping them up to be successful. Those subsidies, once they are in place, are incredibly difficult to remove. No one wants to get a subsidy removed once they are receiving money, if you are a dairy producer in Quebec, for instance. So what ends up happening is that these producers who now have the profits to do so form lobbies, and they lobby the government to increase those subsidies into the future instead of being forced to innovate or adopt other international solutions to their problems. Instead of being able to lobby the government to reach out to international markets, now they stay protected in a domestic market without any hopes of becoming competitive in the long run. We think furthermore, this lack of advancement is not sustainable. So a lot of producers need to rely on these subsidies in order to produce what they are producing, regardless of the fact that somewhere else in the world, someone is doing it better. The European dairy industry, for instance, has a lot of advancement, has a lot of diversity within the dairy that they have, and that's why Canada actually wants to phase out the types of dairy subsidies that we have through the Canadian-European Trade Agreement. An important aspect of which is the removal of import quotas on European dairy products, right? We think this is a natural progression of the free market and of choice for businesses. We think furthermore, when large businesses are getting subsidies for what they produce, smaller businesses don't have enough capital to both overcome the profit margins that these businesses have, as well as the additional income they get from the subsidies. This means that small businesses or innovative firms are not able to access those markets, which leads to a lack of overall competition within domestic industries. We think that is really harmful as well. We think, lastly, when you increase these barriers to entry, you don't actually play to the strength of the domestic market. So now, when you have like the Western provinces being really good at selling wheat or beef or other like cattle and stuff like that, they're not able to reach out to international markets because there's protectionist measures in place for them in Canada. That means other international actors aren't going to cede their own protectionist measures in order to allow our producers to access those markets. We think that's really important today. We think our 4 issues that we've outlined for you are going to be big issues in this debate, and we welcome side opposition to the quarterfinals of JDC West.
I now call upon the first member of the opposition, who shall speak for a total of 7 minutes, the first and last of which will be protected time.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for her remarks. May I bring your attention to the resolution here before us today. Be it resolved that Canada eliminate the food industry supply chain management system. So what have we heard today from the government? They talked about subsidies. They talked about eliminating these subsidies. But the food industry supply chain management system is so much wider than just a subsidy, than just these little barriers to trade. The food industry supply chain management system is so much more than a little bit of government intervention. There's so much private involvement in this. It's not just about money, economics. There are social concerns, political concerns, safety concerns, health issues with all these things, and with just the current food industry supply chain management system. But we believe that they've just covered subsidies. While we may not believe that subsidies like this should continue, we believe that the food industry supply chain management, the definition here is eliminate the entire food industry supply chain management system. So now let's talk about the subsidies, as the government would like to talk about. Subsidies today are in place for a reason. They're in place to ensure that Canadian consumers get a good price for what they are buying. If we allow more competition in the market, how are we going to ensure safety? How are we going to ensure efficiency? How are we going to ensure that a free market is what's best for Canadians? And today we challenge as side opposition. Is this just the elimination of subsidies? Is this the right way to move for the government? Because this is like we have to analyze this from a holistic perspective. And the government is not doing so today. Say the government allows for a complete opening of the market, of free trade. We'll have a bunch of new producers, as the government would like in a second. As the government would like, Mr. Speaker, to have a bunch of new producers. We only have so many safety inspectors. We only have a certain system. This certain system right now is able to provide for the demands of the Canadian consumers and is in place to ensure efficiency. Would you not agree?
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that we in no way mentioned that we would remove food safety inspection agencies in order for these products to reach our markets?
Thank you, Madam Prime Minister. That's a great question. With the introduction of new entrants into this market, to allow for an expansion of the market, as the government would like to bring up today, our current market is made up of many, a few large firms that operate in this market that are receiving government subsidies. That's a great point. We have only a certain amount of food safety inspectors. Now we open the floodgates. More small players come in. How many food safety inspectors do we have? Currently, we do not even have enough. We do not even have enough for the current system. Allowing free trade, allowing a complete opening of the markets, allowing everything to just coming to us as it is today, just allowing everything, that is not the way to go. The current system was put in place for efficiency, for regulation, for safety purposes, because we can currently meet the demands of the Canadian people at a fair price for both consumers and producers. We believe that this is the best way to continue. And we were just talking about subsidies today. We're not even talking about anything else. Even the current system right now works for Canadians. And we as side opposition do not believe that their plan holds any merit, just eliminating subsidies and allowing these companies to come in. Our second point today is on efficiency. So let's talk about efficiency of these current firms. These current firms are large, centralized, organized. They've been working under this system, this current government system, this subsidy system, for the longest time. They've been working under this current system of organizing into large, centralized firms in order to serve the needs of the Canadians as best they could. Now, we are currently in no shortage of any dairy products. We are in shortage of no meat products or any other products that the government would like to eliminate subsidies for. Yes?
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that efficiency comes from the pressure to innovate?
I'd like to thank the government for their question. Now, let's talk about efficiency. The current system is efficient. Why is it efficient? Because it's been in place for so long and just disrupting the status quo, allowing this innovation, as we have mentioned, health issues, safety issues, just changing the whole system that has been in place for so long, that the government has put in place for many, many governments before this government here today. This system that has been in place for so long, and the infrastructure, the systems that have been designed around this whole centralized system, this current system that we have in place, just eliminating the system, completely allowing a free market, allowing free reign over this. We believe that having many small players is not as good as having a centralized, regulated provider and having fair prices for both producers and consumers, as they are both Canadians. It is not just consumers that we have to focus on today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at what is fair for the consumers, what is fair for the producers. And we believe that the government's plans that are currently in place today, as of today, are already satisfying the needs of both producers and consumers. And now the government wants to change this plan. The government wants to look out for the consumer, as they would like to say, because somehow these large firms are making so much money. But currently consumers are not complaining about the prices that are not crazy like some other countries. Our prices are fair for the consumer, as the government would step in and allow greater quotas. The government would step in and allow for more production if the prices were too high. We currently can meet the demands of the people with our current supply. We are not running out of supply. We are not running out of supply. That's what I like to say. And right now, with the fair price for people, and just based on the fact that they talked about subsidies today, as opposition, we'd like to summarize some of our points here today. We believe that our current system, with our current infrastructure and our current management system, we believe that this is the best design for Canadians today. Completely tearing this apart, eliminating it, overhauling it, and just the subsidies, just eliminating just this one thing, instead of eliminating the whole food industry supply chain system, as was mentioned in the resolution, just eliminating this one thing is too much. This is too much. We have health concerns. As side opposition, we have to look beyond profits. We have to look beyond just what's good for one segment of the population. We have to look beyond what's best for the people, what's best for the consumers. And we believe, as side opposition, this current plan that is in place currently is best for both parties. Thank you very much.
I now call upon the second member of government who shall speak for a total of 7 minutes, the first and last of which will be protected time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here today on Side Government, we've had a very, very strong model proposed before you about our elimination of, as you see here, food industry supply chain management systems, which we have covered. We hear side opposition telling us about the #1 issue today with food safety. Well, last time I checked, food safety wasn't a part of this. Food safety is something that's already covered with very, very strong policy in Canada today. One of the best food safety policies and procedures to make sure we can implement that policy in Canada. So before I get into my clash, I'll give you a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today. So #1, I'll be extending on the #1 point that we heard from the side prop, the lack of choice for business that we currently have. I'll be extending that to talk about a few points, including the lack of competitive advantage for Canada that we currently have, but the lack of consumer choice, and the harm that we have to domestic producers and how we can expand it with this elimination that we're targeting today. So just to address the first point, you talked about us only targeting one small aspect of the supply chain. Well, I think today, all of us know that when we have a supply chain, we have a producer, we have a retailer, we have a consumer, and we have the continuous loop that keeps that system afloat. Where is government most effective? In that first step of the loop where we have the most problems in Canada, between the producer and the retailer. Because we have these large boards that are making sure that only the largest supplier in the industry, these big farms, are getting the most dollar, to make sure that our small firms, these small farms, aren't able to produce more options for consumers and produce better quality items. Sure, I'll take it.
Are you aware that something like a wheat board buys from all farmers, big or small, and sells them at a certain market price instead of just buying from the big producers?
Thank you for the point. So I would ask a repeating question, asking if you're aware that these wheat boards are primarily purchasing from the largest players that have the strongest positions in these unions and are pulling the biggest votes. We want to make sure that the small player who is less represented in these groups, make sure that they can have representation and gain money as well. So also, we were talking about efficient markets, and that's something you're saying, that we have an efficient food market right now. So let's look at milk prices in Canada right now compared to the US. If you go to, let's say, the real Canadian superstore, you're paying like $3.50 for 2 liters of milk. You go to the US and you pay, let's say $1.50 to $2. Is that really efficient to say that our southern neighbors are producing these goods for 50% of what we are? That hurts both our producers and our consumers. We also want to talk about the wheat board that you talked about. You're saying it's not a problem, these are good things. Well, how come the wheat board was dismantled then? That was one of the biggest issues in the last 10 years in Canadian politics. So to get on to my constructive then, talking about the lack of competitive advantage for Canada. So first of all, technology and agricultural technology is what used to keep us afloat and why agriculture is so strong in our country. But looking at the international markets now, people are picking up steam. People are coming towards the same level of technology that we have. Crop rotation is not something that's new in India anymore. We can produce rice for much, much cheaper in other countries where we have lower wages and we have all these people bringing in the same product for good quality. What does that do for our domestic industries? It makes us competitive. It makes us develop that industry, develop that technology to make ours better once again. If we have these subsidies and these price restrictions, these quotas, stopping all that international competition from coming in, what do we end up with? We have an example like Japan, where they put quotas on rice, where you're paying 400, lots of money per kilogram for a bag of rice, which is very similar quality to something that comes from California. We look at a marketing case study where Japan had these bags of rice coming from California, and they had to put tons of government money into advertising and marketing agencies to say Japan rice tastes better. Well, we don't want to have to do that with our Canadian products. We do have fantastic beef, we do have fantastic wheat, and we want to make sure that these products are competitive on all scales. What does this do? This puts more time into education so that we can be diversifying our economy and finding new ways to be successful. And to talk about that too, people want their food to be cheap. We want to be affordable, and that will make us purchase more. So this comes to my second point, the lack of consumer choice that we have right now. Right now with these subsidies and these big buying groups, we'll have one type of milk that you can buy, say for example at the superstore. What do we want? We have multiple options. Why is the farmer's market not something that's popular anymore? Because these boards, because this domination of the market is not allowing us to see more local items, more sustainable items, and things that are coming forward on a smaller scale, but are really expensive because it's hard for them to compete. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, would side not opposition answer that? How are they going to regulate safety when we have all different types of milk coming from all over the world? They haven't talked about any expansion of our current safety measures.
So right now we have great safety measures to make sure that anything that we import, especially food, is of high quality. You can't take a banana on the airplane. You also can't load, like 3,000 pounds of bananas that are of low quality on an airplane to sell in Canada. We have current status quo measures that are extremely, extremely good for all the imports that we have. Maybe we can't produce bananas, and that's why we bring them here. But why do we need to restrict that to items that can't be produced in Canada? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, is the government unaware that there are currently not enough food safety inspectors for the current food supply in Canada?
So food safety inspection is something somewhat unrelated to this, but it's an area that we have jobs being created for people. When we have these new products being brought in, that will create more jobs for Canadian people looking for employment. So just to quickly touch on my last point about the harm to domestic producers from subsidies. And this is why right now we have really expensive prices, because when you have these subsidies, not only does that raise the price of the products that we're selling, but it also raises the wages that you have to pay, the salaries. Because say if you have a farm and you have the subsidy coming as a bonus, that means that everyone in this industry is going to be making a little bit more money. But I guess on the same way you look at CPP and EI, when you get that and you have to pay that from your salary, you also have to pay a bit extra from the employer. So we're increasing costs for the consumers, we're increasing costs for the employers, we're increasing costs for the employees. And this is something that's just raising the price floor on agricultural products as a whole. So why do we think that that is the most important area to touch on the supply chain management system? Because that's where government is most effective, and that's where we can take out these boards and give them 10 years to sustainably remove the pressures that they're putting on our markets that's making us uncompetitive, that's making us, lack the innovation that we'll need to compete in 5 and 10 and 15 years against the global markets. We have things like GMOs coming in, and that's something that's going to completely change the agricultural market. We want to make sure that Canada remains top-notch. We've been at the top for a long time. We're starting to see our position slip, and by opening our borders and increasing trade, we'll talk a bit about international prospects that we can get from this. But me talking about domestic strength, this is what's going to keep our market strong for the future. So just to sum up before I finish, we talked about the competitive advantage for Canada, we talked about the increase to consumer choice, and we talked about the increase in choice for producers, both on the large and small scale. So that is why we proposed this solution today. Thank you.
I now call upon the second member of opposition, who shall speak for a total of 7 minutes, the first and last of which will be protected time.
Mr. Speaker, side opposition is hungry. Not only for affordable homegrown food, but also for some actual arguments from side government. First thing I'm going to do is go through side government's points, show why they have totally lost touch with the Canadian people, and then go through side opposition's points. Now, I'm going to start with a quote to show just how side government is out of touch with how the economy works and how farming works here in Canada. One of my favorite quotes from side government was, "Subsidies increase price." Well, Mr. Speaker, the whole point of subsidies is to decrease the price for the consumer. We're trying the government is involved in an effort to bring homegrown, high-grade quality food to the people. And, but yet for some reason, side opposition, or side government doesn't understand how this works. Now, I'm quite touched by this because my parents are farmers, and one of the things that I'd like to mention was in their model, was they get 10 years, and if they go bankrupt, they can get retraining for jobs. Well, my parents are old, Mr. Speaker, and they were betting their retirement plan on their farm being sustainable and betting on these subsidies to keep them going. Now, you've torn this away from them, and they have to find a new way to make a living. Are they going to have to sell the farm that they've had for generations? Are they going to have to give up all that they've worked for this far? Do you really expect these older people to go out, find a new job, and also, how are they going to stay employed during this time that they have to get retrained, go out, and get re-educated? This is not good for the Canadian people. Agriculture takes up a huge percentage of Canadian employment, and it's vital that we keep these people's interests at heart. What was the other one that I really enjoyed? Oh, side government. One second. Side government believes. No, you can ask. I'll ask you. Just stand up. One of the things the side government said was we need the free market. We need to bring imports from around the world. And that somehow market safety inspection isn't part of the supply chain management. Well, Mr. Speaker, we go from production to the processing plants to the consumers. And in the middle, you must go through safety inspection. If we're bringing in food from all over the world, we now have to re-inspect it. Do they follow the same guidelines that Canada employs? Do they follow everything we do? Side government wants the free market. They want to have things come in, and yet this is food. This is vital to Canadian people. We need to make sure, we need to interfere. We need to make sure that the people are fed. Yet you don't want that.
Mr. Speaker, so you talked about parents potentially losing jobs. Well, is adequate compensation not better than them losing the entire farm when the Canadian agricultural industry loses innovation and gets beat out by international competition?
This is just the point. Do these people need to lose their jobs at all, Mr. Speaker? And if we're going to look at innovation, let me ask you this. Are these small farms, these small segregated family-owned farms run by mom and pop with their one combine, actually changing the way that innovation works? Innovation is run by the large-scale businesses, the large plants, the large groups. These groups are the ones that find new processing, new ways of doing things. They're the ones that innovate industry. They're the ones that are run by business majors, by opera majors, the ones that can figure out how to make this more efficient. And these groups are the ones that take food from these small farms across. They buy the crops from mom and pop. Or they own and work with mom and pop. And if you put mom and pop out of business, you've all of a sudden cut a huge portion of the food out of our economy. With less food in the marketplace, now all of a sudden food prices have gone up. And Mr. Speaker, if you're one of the #1 concerns with the Canadian populace is the economy. We already have the highest debt per capita per person, personal debt per capita. Do we really need more expenses? Do we really need more expenses and problems for the Canadian people? Money is tight already. Food prices are rising. Should they go up even more?
Mr. Speaker, so you talked about these small farms, mom and pop, being really important. Well, are they important, or are they just being eaten up by these collectivist farms that are taking all the profits from the profit share?
Are they really important? Well, yes, they are very important, and working with these collective boards, which gives them negotiating power across the board. Side government wants to be one of the world leaders in sharing food and making everything better. We need collective bargaining power to do that. If these mom and pops can't negotiate export prices, these mom and pops can't export to the whole world. They need to work together. They need to be unified in the way that they do things. So, as I've gone through, side opposition's arguments, such as changing in domestic markets, innovating, and being a world leader, all fall. Now it's time to go back through side opposition's arguments and show why this is important. So our #1 argument was health and safety. When we're bringing in food from all over the world, we now need more staff, which we're currently short on, to make sure that this food is safe for the Canadian people. Here in Canada, we already have high-quality, homegrown food. We have the highest quality wheat, the highest quality beef. Do we need to be importing other food? Is it going to be as fresh as ours? Is it going to reach the entirety of the nation? What is the benefit to this, Mr. Speaker? We then mentioned the economy, how this is what's efficient for the Canadian people. This is what's helping Canadian mom and pops. This is what's fueling our economies. These small rural communities run off of agriculture. If you start putting these farms out of business, what is going to happen to our communities, Mr. Speaker? How are we going to keep our livelihoods going? How are we going to maintain our standard of living? As we mentioned, our third more political point was that if you want to be a world leader, if you're trying to do this, all that putting our small farms out of business will do was increase our food prices, and now, look, we're actually less competitive on the global market. And finally, those were our three. So, in conclusion, all of side government's points have fallen. And side opposition has came to you today showing that the current system that we have is keeping people employed, it's making sure that the standard of living across the board in our small communities, our rural communities, our homegrown communities are maintained. It's making sure that the farmers that we hold dear to our heart, the people who elected us to be here to represent them, are protected, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, this bill must fall. Thank you.
I now call upon the third member of government who shall speak for a total of 7 minutes, the first and last of which will be protected time.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate side opposition's salvo, but I do not appreciate their content. We feel that on side of government, that there's a very large disconnect between what we are doing and what side opposition believes we are doing. We believe, I want to start by clarifying my model very quickly, and then I will get into a roadmap for the rest of my speech. One huge glaring issue that we have modeled in our debate that seems to be ignored is that the health and safety standards aren't contained within Canada's food industry supply chain. Those are regulatory bodies outside the supply chain. Those exist in a bigger Canadian social context instead of just within the supply chain. That we believe that eliminating these subsidies and quotas do not affect the health and safety standards, which I will talk to when I get to my refutation. So I want to talk about where we are going today and what you're going to see. I'm going to first talk about our 4 points on side government, our 4 lacks. The lack of choice for business, which Prime Minister has brought up, the lack of competitive advantage, the lack of consumer choice, and then I will introduce the lack of international leadership. Then I will refute the 3 main points brought up by side opposition. Let's begin. First of all, I want to talk about the lack of choice for business. We believe that this has not been refuted at all by side opposition. In fact, it has been very dropped. So I'm just going to quickly reiterate what the Prime Minister has said. That this leads to a lack of choice for individual consumers. That we believe that the world exists on a macro scale, that there is much trade, there is a lot of specific products that Canadians can get that are currently being stifled out by existing subsidies. That we believe that for free trade to exist, especially in an increasingly interdependent world, that these subsidies and artificial floating of prices need to be dropped. You can look at your phone, you have pieces from all around the world, then you can walk into Superstore and it's food majority from Canada. That we are living in an interdependent world and we rely on each other more and more, and we feel that the agriculture industry is lagging behind. And this causes a lack of choice for business. The second point brought up by the Speaker of Government is the lack of competitive advantages within these businesses. That we think these protectionist aspects further lack the access into the international market. That we believe we need to, we'll get to you in a second. We believe that we should embrace a dynamicism within Canada, and we believe that Canada should further the competitive advantages, which are currently lagging behind in agriculture. That we believe these subsidies do not bring a pressure to innovate and a pressure to change and adapt to current world situations, whereas farmers can create a profit without having to develop quicker and more efficient production. I will now take a POI, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, has the government considered looking beyond profits and considered the environmental impacts of their plan, such as international food imports?
Mr. Speaker, we agree that the environmental harms may exist in other countries, but we think that there is a reciprocity in international trade, and we think that having Canada as an international leadership position, which I will touch on in my 4th point, could help improve global standards within environmental and social conditions. I will get to that, and I will remind you when I do address that. So the 3rd thing is the lack of consumer choice. That there has been a little bit of disconnect about what the wheat board, what side opposition believes the wheat board does, and what it actually did. The wheat board artificially set the wheat prices and had all the wheat to be funneled through the wheat board and pushed out. What they did is artificially set it too low for smaller farms to produce a sustainable number. That they looked at these efficiencies and scales that the bigger farm could get, and chose that number to kind of stifle out small wheat farmers. That we think that these bloated trade unions that exist in the agriculture industry control the price and control how much that these small farmers can sell. This has a damaging effect for these small mom and pop farms that side opposition really talked about. That this drives these small mom and pop farms into specific industries that they may not want to be into. They are losing the choice of businesses and the choice of what they want to produce because they are being controlled by the Canadian Wheat Board and other unions such as the Dairy Board in Quebec to limit their supply way past the efficiency and way past the optimal number for them to meet. There is also the lack of consumer choice, which I will touch on further. I will take the POI first.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, where else would these small wheat farmers sell their wheat if they were being outcompeted by the large firms that could produce cheaper? Where would would they sell?
In the status quo of the wheat board, they wouldn't be selling it in Canada because they were not producing enough. Side opposition seems to fail to recognize that point. That the wheat board was setting it artificially low, so they put it. I feel like I've discussed that enough, and I need to move on in my speech. We can also see this in European cheese quotas, where cheese prices in Canada are artificially high. We also see this in quotas in European alcohol here too. That there are way across the food industry, there are completely subjective protectionist ideals that affect consumer choices that we believe need to be changed, because we cannot compete internationally with the type of goods that are being produced in the specialty countries. That we think that this does have a defined and distinct consumer harm that we believe that side opposition did not dismantle. Now I want to spend time on new content. I want to talk about the international leadership that Canada can attain. That working to break down our borders can work to break down the borders in other countries. That we can become an international leader in free trade and free agriculture. We think that working together as a globalized world and working together to promote industry, not only within our own borders, within the global context, is beyond profits, is beyond our own country, and is looking at the larger scale of these events. That we think that we can see these in Japan's protectionist measures throughout the 1970s when there was an arms race between protectionist measures, so rice would have to be mixed. Then Canada took protectionist measures between Japanese, it was seaweed. And then it went back and forth, and this still exists to this day, that not all of these barriers have been dropped because of fear of being the first one to drop it. And we think that taking a stand and saying we believe in this, and we believe in freer trade, and we want to support the world as a whole, will promote international leadership, which will spill over to other places in the larger world. So those were our 4 lacks. I'm going to repeat them once again: the lack of choice for business, the lack of competitive advantages, the lack of consumer choice, and the lack of international leadership. So I'm going to quickly refute the 3 points brought up by side opposition. I have been doing it implicitly throughout my speech, so a lot of this will be returning information. So for this health and safety idea, that this infrastructure to already check the health and safety within Canada is already in place. If anything, this creates more job creation, and the same amount of food will be eaten by Canadians. Opening free trade doesn't lead to a spike in food sales and a massive influx of food and safety individuals that would have to come in. We think that point is largely moved. Also, this idea of efficiency, this idea that these boards have been in place for so long, therefore they are the efficient way to do it. We believe that Canada is innovative and dynamic, and we think that stifling this innovation and dynamicism, just because it's been in place for so long, just because it's assumed to be efficient, is fundamentally false. The last point is that sustainable farming among the farmers, we touched on this a lot when we talked about efficiency, that we believe that forcing them to innovate will help. I'd like to thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition, who shall speak for a total of 7 minutes. The first minute of which is protected time, and the final 2 minutes, which is rebuttal, as well as protected time.
Inside government's dreams to put Canada into the international markets, in their big, broad visions, they forgot something. They forgot about us, the Canadian people. They forgot about you and me, and they forgot that the industry that they're trying to regulate. They're trying to destroy regulations on the food on our plates, ladies and gentlemen. This is something we have to consider, and something side government has ultimately not. Why do we pay a little bit higher in the price for food? We pay for high quality. We have AAA grade beef across the country. Canada is one of the very few wheat holders in this country that holds A-grade wheat across all the inspecting boards. Almost no other country in the world holds that. Why is that? We have huge central regulations. Our processing is inspected. And to point out a flaw in the government's plan, food safety is definitely within the supply management. We would be worried on side opposition if we had to privatize food management, if we had to keep it well away from our food supply chain itself. We want the food safety inspection to be right in the middle of the supply chain. And ultimately, this is where they're completely misunderstood the resolution. Ultimately, they've ditched their burden. They tried, this resolution that they brought us here for was to eliminate the entire food supply management system. What they did was they said eliminate subsidies and eliminate overarching authorities and overseeing boards across 10 years. We would like to point out that includes our safety regulation, however much side government would tell you otherwise. Secondly, what I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to dismantle this very poor model that they gave you. I'm going to show you where all of their points actually sacrificed food quality, and that is something that they have not considered. And I'm going to show you what our choices were made with a Canadian perspective and not a generalized international one. So let's start with their model. Their model had 3 main points. First of all, phase out all subsidies and quotas in the supply industry over 10 years. And what we have an issue with that is, first of all, subsidies ensure the small farms stay afloat. When we have the wheat board in place, the wheat board made sure small farms stayed afloat because they didn't, unlike what side government told you, the wheat board offered enough prices based on demand and supply. So when the farmers had all of their wheat bought regardless, that's what the wheat board did. They bought everything. The problem was when they took it away is now wheat farmers had to go to big industry. They had to be bought out or they risked being taken or they risked going to bankrupt. So ultimately, what they have in their model is they're trying to make sure that lives for small farmers are worse because ultimately they'll be forced to shut down. They won't have any way to market themselves on an international scale because unfortunately a small farmer in Saskatchewan can't go to markets like Europe, can't go to markets like Asia. They rely on bigger people to do it for them. And yet you seem to want the small farms to fail.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that it is more problematic when that farmer can never go to the markets internationally, when they don't have the option in the future, when we've tied their hands forever because we want to inflate the subsidies right now?
Okay, thank you. I think I understand your question. The problem is they ask, why can they never go to the big markets? And the problem is, they're in big markets right now. It's just they supply to bigger firms who represent them. They've come together in cooperatives. They've come together in big factories to say, ladies and gentlemen, let's go, let's all sell together because collectively, we as Canadians must unite and sell. What they would suggest is that we all fend for ourselves in this free market system that is simply un-Canadian, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, let's talk about dismantling overseeing bodies. The whole reason why we have A-grade quality is high regulations and high safety standards. The problem when you dismantle all of our overseeing bodies, you leave it to the little guys to ensure safety. And while we think that they may try as hard as they might, they can't afford the expensive equipment required to scan for disease. They can't afford inspectors coming around all the time. That's why big corporations with big budgets and big subsidies from us get to do that. They get to make sure we maintain a quality product. And that's what they forgot. And then they talked about job retraining, but they never really rebuilt the fact that there's a lot of farmers out there who cannot get retrained. There's a lot of things where they actually didn't mention compensation for farms in their model, and it's something they threw in when they realized that there was a huge hole, and that's, in fact, the entirety of their model, just a bunch of holes. So let's talk about what we talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, we talked to you about food safety. Mr. Speaker, we talked to you about food quality. The problem with their international argument and all about imports is that they forget that Canadians hold the highest standard of all food products across the world. We don't need to be at an even more competitive advantage because we hold the highest quality of goods. No one else can outcompete our quality, and that's why we're allowed in international markets. That's why we still get imports. If you go to Superstore today, you get products from all over the world. We have bananas, we have lettuce, we have things we can't grow here because we trade them A-quality goods ensured by our A-quality regulations. And yet you seem to want to lower the quality of everything.
Mr. Speaker, the side opposition honestly believe that we don't inspect the European dairy that we already get in Canada today, and somehow we're going to magically get rid of all the regulation we already have in place and
Sit down, please. Thank you. I understand your question. In your model, the model that you seem to have an oversight in, food safety is an overseeing body that you want to dismantle over the next 10 years. We don't know what side government is arguing anymore because they seem to be going back and forth on their model. And because of that, this is what this round ultimately came down to. It came down to safety, it came down to Canadian food, and it came down to international markets. Let's talk about safety. Their model asked to dismantle safety implicitly. They didn't realize the extent of our food safety, and they also didn't realize the extent of this debate. They've ditched their burden, they've made their lives easier by only targeting subsidies and all these overseeing boards, when in reality our food industrial chain is so massive, but side government dreamed too big. They wanted to get all these imports in, and they never justified to you why we want more imports when we're already getting enough imports, and it would sacrifice the quality of Canadian goods. That's what we presented to you today. We presented to you high-quality Canadian goods, and we implied safety. Their imports are not going to be overseen because they're shutting down the very administrations that are supposed to keep us safe. Side government does not want to keep you safe. They want to expand your palate, but at what cost? At what E. coli are we all picking up when we go out and eat at the supermarket? Are we going to have to eat Chinese shrimp? Ladies and gentlemen, safety is of the utmost importance. Now let's talk about food and small farms. We talked about this idea that with the shutdown of the wheat board, we have to go to big farms. We have to take away the choice of business because we took away the only people who will buy their wheat otherwise. People banded together in huge Canadian groups, and we think that that's fun. We think our collective bargaining power has allowed us to maintain A-grade, world-class products, and we don't see why they want to bring in lower quality European products when we have fine Canadian products back home. And ultimately, we have to look at their imports. The idea of the environment that I beg the Prime Minister to address in her 2 minutes about why they want to suddenly start increasing environmental damage to imports, something that was never touched. Ladies and gentlemen, these imports aren't always the best thing. They never presented to you why the ball needed to be moved. Why do we need to dismantle everything when we have A-grade products, A-grade quality, A-grade safety, and everyone in Canada is employed. Everyone in Canada has a job with the status quo, and side government here wants to dismantle everything for the sake of having a little bit more variety in our food. Thank you.
I now call upon the Prime Minister again for their official rebuttal, who shall speak for a total of 2 minutes, all of which is protected time.
Mr. Speaker, the burden of side opposition today was to refute the arguments that we presented. We gave you specific harms that we saw in the interest today and the solutions that we wanted to present to those harms. Those harms were a lack of consumer choice, because believe it or not, people do want European dairy. That's why we go over the quotas all the time, and they're willing to pay high prices for it. We told you that businesses don't have the choice to innovate because they don't face the competitive pressures. So now we're propping up small businesses that aren't able to have efficiencies. In the short term, we recognize that side opposition's parents might lose a job and they might face hardship because of it. This always happens when you have increasing globalization. But in the long run, it is much worse if we artificially take those businesses all the way down the road, 10 or 15 years, and now the subsidies are both unsustainable for government and these individual firms cannot compete because they face no pressure to do so. We think it is a much worse world when you follow side opposition's model. We told you that the lack of consumer choice actually does affect individuals. So when we go to the United States, we see their milk prices are lower, and we ask why we don't have the same prices ourselves. Everyone needs food, Mr. Speaker. Everyone needs food security, and keeping those prices high harms the average Canadian and harms individuals. What side opposition told you today was that somehow our model was un-Canadian, and we need to stick to Canadian values. Mr. Speaker, those Canadian values become irrelevant when we don't remain large international players who show leadership, when we don't remove protectionist tariffs on our own soil in order to allow both those products to reach our markets where consumers want them, but also, which they didn't refuse, to allow our products to go to European markets, right? Recognize the beef market in Europe is 7 or 8 times larger than the Canadian one. We haven't had any refutation to the majority of our points. All they've talked about is food inspectors, and even if their point about food inspectors not being alive and well is true, it is a better model where we are able to regulate through the import taxes that already exist and the import measures that already exist than to refuse that. Thank you.
I now call this matter to be concluded. I welcome the members to cross the floor and shake hands. May I ask that all members in the gallery exit the room and refrain from talking in the hallways. I also remind the members and emphasize this to not discuss the matters presented to you here today.